This is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. Today, we are offering 4 conversations from episode 39. Our discussion with Mazen Noureddin about his recently published paper discussing the new MASEF blood-based non-invasive test for fibrosis and fatty liver disease, the first test to take advantage of metabolomics in a potentially commercial setting. This fairly brief conversation is more of a wrap-up than anything else. Louise Campbell asks about socioeconomic differences and how they might affect the population. I ask about other groups that we might consider exploring, and we then move on to my final question about how MASEF might be used 2 years from now. The answers are intriguing and exciting. NITs, and particularly blood-based NITs, are an important area for academic and commercial development. This conversation introduces an exciting new blood-based NIT that brings metabolomics into the discussion for the first time, and it provides an enticing glimpse of what our future might hold. So sit back, listen, learn, enjoy, and when you're done, join the dialogue on our LinkedIn discussion group.
Louise Campbell.
Can I ask, were you able to break down any socioeconomic differences in those at risk within that population?
Mazen Noureddin.
We have not, within the MASEF paper, we have not. It's the group is really homogeneous. That it's like there's Chile, there's Mexico, there's Virginia, there's Beverly Hills, Cedars-Sinai, where I was. So and it's like bits and pieces. I'm not sure we'll tease out that, but yeah, it big cohorts like UK Biobank. Although I think it's shifted towards certain population, but to Jörn's point, either from MASEF or MIT-ALD, we need a larger prospective cohort with multi-ethnic groups. I think the NAIL NIT will provide that eventually because it's multi-center prospective study with multiple U.S. and international sites.
Roger Green.
Interesting. So, Mazen, we've covered this whole topic in 46 minutes, which is really efficient. So we now have, I think, about, if to the degree we have time, and Jörn, you've been really generous, given I know you've got other commitments right now. If there's anything anyone would like to speculate on or ask questions, let's get a little further out into fantasy land here and see where we go. And Louise, I think you've been pretty good about this so far in terms of we've got Med-ALD, we've gotten to socioeconomics, we've gotten to different populations. Mazen, are there any populations we've not mentioned that you think might benefit from more work on this as you go forward?
No, I mean, it's like you really need to keep testing it and find out if, I think the next step for us is response to therapy and correlation with outcomes. There are multiple contexts of use that the FDA came up with, and we're looking for more discussion with the FDA and clarities in next month or next few months. There are exciting things coming from the FDA, and thanks to them for pushing also the envelope that way. In my simple mind, I always broke it down into 3 things, not the multiple context of use. I say, like, when a patient comes to you, I say, how bad am I going to live? And am I getting better? Which is diagnostic, follow-up longitudinally, which is a response to therapy, and prognostic. And I think we need to move any NITs at least to these 3 areas. And if one NIT can cover them all, let it be. That's perfect. That's A1C. If not, we can combine as far as we move away from the liver biopsy.
Yeah, the only other area that maybe comes back to my mind is, of course, the cirrhotic population. Mazen, you mentioned you did on purpose not include them to not oversell the test metrics, which I think is a good thing because you approach this critically. Of course, identifying patients with compensated cirrhosis is one of the challenges and something people will want to use a test for.
So I'm glad you brought this point. Let me clarify. In the testing cohort, we did not include cirrhotic because it will shift the AUC into a better AUC. As you know, in the validation cohort, they were cirrhotics. And here we go, another project. We can probably ask the metabolomics folks to look into cirrhotics in particular and have like a test for that. So that report that we have can give you MASL, no MASL, MASH, no MASH, MASH F2 and not, and cirrhotic or not. So that's a great suggestion. Actually, we can go there and get it done. It's just like you need a good number of patients, and we just need one of the pharma companies maybe to give us their cirrhotic cohorts and test it there.
So at that point, I'm going to declare that we've covered the landscape, right? I mean, we've now gotten to demographics, we've gotten to disease severity, nature of disease, different tests to compare. With that, let me just ask a closing question, which is, let's pretend that we're 2 years out from today. Well, starting with Mazen, because you've been living closest to it, and the rest of us are just going to kind of make it up. What do you envision the practical use of MASEF will be 2 years from today, if you had a guess?
I mean, it will be in use is for diagnostic in the next few months, and we'll see real-world cohort data. If it proves to show correlation with histology, I can see one of the approved drugs using it along with their approval to replace liver biopsy, because as you know, that MRIs are quite difficult to get. So I'm hoping that at least we can get to that. Whether it will be in phase 3 clinical trials as one of the endpoints or not, I cannot claim that. It's a stretch. I need more data, such as outcomes.
That's excellent. Jörn, if you had your wish list, where would this be in 2 years, based on what we've heard about it and what we know?
Jörn Schattenberg.
I think I'd like to see those more sophisticated tests being moved into a broader group of physicians using them, having access, having reimbursement, patients opting to buy that test for themselves to maybe spare them inaccurate or, let's say, non-conclusive testing results and having liver biopsies done. So I do want to say I think this is a great paper, Mazen, and although it might have taken some time, it's always great to see those collaborations come to the end. And I think it's inspiring for the field, because I want to see more than 2 transaminases and platelets with age to define an at-risk population of liver disease in the future. So I think that's kind of down the line what you said, but from a different perspective, we need more sophisticated tests to identify patients at risk of dying from liver disease.
Louise?
I echo what Jörn's just been saying there, because I think if we can walk people into a primary care practice and pick out the world's largest cohort of adults affected with poor liver health and the more serious end of that, whilst there may be a risk that we will miss the minor ones who don't have, it's still better. That's exciting. And I think now we've given him an awful lot of projects to work on. Obviously, the pediatric, the adolescent populations would be extremely, because we can go from both ends. I know the average age of these populations are 51 and 54, but if we start and tweak it to find the highest risk people now in these areas, but we still have primary care to start to think liver, because they're not going to request the test unless they start to think that they can see. And obviously there's lean NASH or lean MASH and muscled. But no, it's dead exciting and we're getting there, and great work to you and the team. And I just would love to have sat around the nomenclature you did for the name and keeping it simple.
That was actually way before Mazen came out. So I think the name we came up with a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And when Mazen came out, I was like, oh, they go along the same math club.
Well, yeah, and obviously for English speakers, the name is MASEF. So Louise and I were talking about this before the call. I have 2 thoughts. First of all, Mazen, when you talk about A1C, I think to me, as a marketing researcher, one of the benefits of A1C is it made primary care a lot more confident looking at diabetes, because they had one number they could watch, right? So if we're going to make liver disease something that primary care treats, the ability to get closer to that A1C kind of structure becomes huge. I'm not going to keep using the word massive. It's been used entirely too much in this conversation in too many ways, but huge. Number one. And number 2 is there's a vast population for liver biopsy just isn't realistic, period. Not only is it a bad idea, not only does it have the problems we all know about, but the economics of the location of patients just make it impossible. So the ability to deliver tests not relying on biopsy that gets to the level of granularity that you're talking about here, which is kind of the flip side of the A1C thing, is huge, because it enables people in more remote environments and in less economically privileged nations and economies to be able to treat more patients and evaluate more accurately. So it seems to be exciting and important from so many perspectives, which is why as soon as you dropped me a note saying, would you like to cover this, we took the first week that we had everybody here and did this, and at an odd hour for everybody, because it was worth it.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded the conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. We'll be back next week with coverage of Paris NASH later in the week, quite possibly a preview on Wednesday. Jörn Schattenberg and I will be together in Paris with a cast of friends and colleagues. Louise will be in Australia. Until then, stay safe, surf on. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, enjoy this last long weekend of summer, and we'll see you next week.